Hey, what's going on, gang? Steve at the Graphite Lab here. Hope everybody's doing well. Today, we are going to be talking about building ServiceTitan forms. Now, I did make a past video about how to create PDF forms specifically, how we edit the smart fields on there, adjusting those, bringing them in so you could use them for estimates, checklists, many a thing. Today, we will be focusing on building them within this interface so that your technicians are able to use them from the mobile app. We will also discuss then sharing and importing forms. And finally, we're going to cover how you can trigger forms to come up for your technicians just at the right time when you need them to. And also how you can add conditional logic so that this way your techs don't necessarily have to weed through a ton of questions that won't be relevant for them on that job. Without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so first things first, you're going to want to navigate over to your forms page. If you're on the home screen, you could do this by going settings, typing in forms, find it that way. Neat little trick in ServiceTitan that I don't think I've used it enough. I'm sure nobody is really using this as often as they should. You simply hit backslash, quick navigation. You can get your way to any page in ServiceTitan without needing to click around for it. So if I want to find my list of forms, right, I just type form, I hit list, it'll take me right here. So on here, right, as we're looking at our forms, I've got a couple that are already pre-built in here. However, what you want to do to build a form fresh, just hit that add form button and boom, we're here. Now I'm going to spend a couple of minutes covering these areas here first before we really get into building this thing out. Let me move my noggin here. First things first, you are going to want to name your form, right? So I'm going to call it test for video, nothing crazy, right? I personally, while I'm building things, leave them in unpublished status until I've gotten a chance to preview them, make sure they look just how I want them to. Your published and unpublished, think about this as rough copy versus final draft. Moving through, allow your BU logo on print view is almost always going to be a yes. If you're going to print this form out and hand it to a customer, it's essentially saying is, if I'm doing this form on a HVAC sales job, right? Do I want this logo to show up on this form in the header? Whether you want to have this form be emailed while it's still uncompleted, or if you want this thing to just auto email out to your customers, that's your decision depending on what kind of form you're looking at and how quickly your techs are to email these out themselves. Feel free to check these if they're relevant for you. Big one down here, assign to. The default is 99% of the time how you're going to want to leave this thing. What this means is essentially, where does this form live and what does it pertain to? If you have an arrival checklist, a completion checklist, a summary of findings, a debrief form, all of these things need to be done on every job, right? In theory, based on the rules we set it to, but these are pertaining to a job at hand. So assign it to a job. Now there are very few instances where you want this to be location or customer. For example, like permit information. I want to have a form that has all my permit info. You throw that on a location. You don't want your techs to have to fill out a fresh one for every single job they do at that location, right? So at that point, it makes a lot of sense to have that particular form live on a location. Now, anytime someone goes to fill that form out, it will just override whatever data existed on it before. But you have one form for that location and that's it. Any updates to it will happen there. Same goes here, equipment, right? If you have like a particular information you want written up on a form based on that piece of equipment, by all means, have a form applied to equipment. Almost always, though, you're going to want this on a job. Right, and that is going to be it. If you start clicking multiples, right, let's say you have, 50 forms in your ServiceTitan account. If you start selecting, oh, just put this on all of them, I need this form showing up. I've seen for some reason people do this in the past. Do not do that. What'll end up happening is this form will just duplicate itself 1, 2, 3, 6 times, right? And now the 50 forms that you had are now 300 forms, which will probably crash your technician's mobile app unless they're running on like the highest end iPads. But anywho, should say display on. By default, always throw display for both office and technicians so your techs in the field will be able to do this, right? Apply tags. You can just tag this job after a form has been completed. You do the same thing with location and with customer just by clicking this doodad here and saying, I want to tag all these things with whatever once I've filled out this form. Send as 1 or 2 column. That's just whenever you print the thing out. Do you want it split down the page, right? So you have 2 different lists of all your info, or do you just want it to be 1 column? Saves paper, I suppose. Or, saves PDF space if you're just emailing it. Business units. This is something you want to be mindful of. If you have a form that is very specific for HVAC service, right? Just go ahead and set it here. This way, especially if you're like a multi-trade shop, right? Your forms for plumbing may be pretty different than they are for HVAC, yeah? So save your plumbers the headache of having to see these things whenever they're fishing through their forms. Of course, when we get into triggers, we can discuss how to make a form happen if you're on a certain job under a certain business unit. But just generally, this will trim the list of forms down so that if one of your techs goes to fill something out, they don't get hit with the entire list. It's just with the business units that are relevant to them. Now that is your very basic top end stuff. We're now going to dive into actually building this form out, yeah? So what I like to do, by the way, you'll see down here, upload PDF. Again, previous video on that. Feel free to check it out. We're gonna stick with build a new form here. You'll see add a new item. Personally, I like to create some headers for my form. So I always hit this little drop down, hit add section and title it. Within here, now I'm gonna start adding my items. So I'll say something here like customer name, right? Within a description, name of the customer, right? Whatever. I want this required. Every technician, when they're filling this form out, has to give me the customer name. And here's the cool thing, right? This little type, and we'll get into all of these as we go, but just for this one, generally, you have text, right? Where a technician could just go through, enter it in on their iPad. Very easy. There's an underutilized thing in here, smart fields. What this will do is inherit any of the information that is on the job or the invoice and populate it here. So if I'm looking for customer name, you might as well go to the smart fields and say, all right, is customer name on here? As long as the bill to on the job is right, you're gonna be fine. Customer name will come up for your tech. It'll pull it straight onto that form. They don't need to lift a finger. I'm gonna say done on this one. Next one through is date, right? Require that one as well. We need our technicians to fill that out. These item here, right, for today's date, I could go down and make a date field. So whenever my technician goes in, he pulls from a little calendar on his app and selects the date. Again, you could just go in here to a smart field and find today's date. It's there. Lovely. We'll save that one so our techs don't even have to worry about it. Moving on. Next thing in here, just for the sake of it, right? Technician name. Require it. And just so we can see what the description looks like. Name of primary tech on job. Again, smart field. I cannot explain to you how much these things can lift for your techs in the field and the added efficiency, just changing as much stuff to this as you can. Tech name, boom, they don't have to worry about it. All this stuff, just get them in and out of these forms as quick as you can, right? Anyway, I feel like I've now beaten that horse to death. Smart fields are your friend, and also feel free, like you've got date ranges, you've got numbers you can enter in if it is like specific numbers. For example, job number, right? If I'm gonna say, give me the job number on here, I can go through and say, hey, your keyboard will be condensed down to just numbers as you enter this in. Similarly, one more time just for the hell of it, job number, it's right there. Just have them do it this way, no big deal, right? Anywho, now moving on, I promise. We are now going to create a new section. So again, I hit the little drop down here, add section is questions, right? And we can now say, add item, complete. We're gonna go into a couple of these other options here. Now, for something like this, right, we could have radio buttons, drop down items. One of those two probably makes the most sense. By the way, your drop down is what you think it is. Hey, you pick text, but we give you the set of options you can pick. We would say here, like, yes or no, move on, right? This way, here's how your tech would interact. Or if you wanted to, right, we could go through and make these radio buttons, which is for the other way you've always heard this said anywhere else in life, the bubbles. Yes or no bubble instead. Just a linear, you must check one of these two things, right? You only have a couple options and you need to just pick one of them. If I wanted to say, what were your findings, right? Acquire that. Let's say now I want to use checkboxes, right? We'll throw a couple different options here. All of this is just for your ability to see. Checking the box, yeah or nay, right? Also, what we could do here is stoplight buttons. And at this point, your technician can pick any kind of a bad, okay, great kind of selection that you would like on any one of these items. Last but not least, I always like to throw on here signature, right? Get a customer signature. You can go here, have a signature, and if there's any reasons that you would accept that a customer would not sign, feel free, add reasons in here, and it'll just list it out for your technicians. Other than that, the only other one on here that we really didn't cover too much, gang, is photos, right? Go here, picture, and this way our technician would have to upload a picture or take one through their mobile app, especially if you want to require something like this. Nice thing to have. At this point, I am just going to slide this one up because I always like to have my signatures at the bottom, and I will now do a quick little save here. So next thing we're going to cover here is form triggers. As I am looking at my my list of form here, you hover over, you hit add a trigger, right? I'm going to do it for job completion checklist, right? Why not? We go here, we're going to add this trigger, and now I'm going to get to write rules on when my technician will be prompted to fill in this form. So if we set here job, now if we had equipment, for example, if that was what this form was assigned to, if you remember back when we were going through the job, call, customer, location, equipment, technician, if yours is assigned to a job, this is all that's coming up. If you have equipment as well, that'll show, and you can say, hey, trigger this form anytime this particular equipment type is added. For sake of what we're doing here, we're gonna stick with job because this is just the most common one, right? Now, business unit, for my completion checklist, right? Let's say I only really wanna do this for service jobs. I will say plumbing service. Now you may say, hey, why can I not drop down and choose my electrical service, my HVAC service, my plumbing service? You can only do one at a time. You have to set another trigger for that other business unit. Now, if I wanted to further whittle this down and say, all right, not only is it gonna be any job under this, this particular business unit, but I really only want it happening when I'm doing a clogged toilet, right? I can now whittle it down to such a degree, so if you have more of a narrow form that is built for one express purpose, you can tailor it down this way. You can also restrict and say, hey, don't show me this for residential or commercial customers. I just say, hey, I only want to do this for residential folks. Bang, set it accordingly. Event, now this is going to trigger when is your technician going to be prompted to fill in this form. If we're doing a completion checklist, we would go right around closeout, right? Whenever our tech hits a closeout. You can go through and set this for like an arrival checklist, for example. You would say the arrive button. Whenever that reminder is going to come up for them and say, hey, you got to knock this form out. Also, if they are selling work, perform work now or perform work later. You can base it around that as well. If you really wanted to, you could even say, hey, whenever this particular service or task is added to an invoice, right? Or piece of equipment as well, I want you to prompt this form whenever that item hits it, right? I could also apply this based on value, right? And just say, hey, if a job exceeds a certain invoice total, now this form is necessary. So it gives you a lot of different items, which, by the way, just for the sake of it, right? Let's say if a job exceeds $99, now when the invoice total changes to $99 or more. you've got a couple different options here on how you want to force this form into a technician's purview. Last thing here, required, and do I want to trigger this on every appointment? Making this required will essentially tell you, just like we had those fields before, where hey, we require fields, so when you start this form, you're not done till these are done. Here, if I make this required, my technician cannot close out this job without filling it in. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that, like, if we have an arrival checklist, right, and my technician is, whenever it's triggered at arrive, my technician can say, I'll fill that out at the end and move on. He can't get out of that job, though, until this thing is done. This is just saying you can't knock the job out until it's finished, not necessarily forcing you into the same event that you pick up here. That is essentially triggers in a nutshell, gang. Not a whole lot to it. Now, the next thing that I want to discuss with you is importing and exporting these forms and how you can crowdsource them. One easy way is you can go into the Titan Exchange and pull from the litany of forms that already exist here for you. So I can just check these boxes. Here, here, here. I hit pull. It will then create these forms within my form list. Very easy way to gather as much of this as you can. Let's say that you have a friend of yours that you're not competing necessarily, so you don't mind sharing forms, right? If you hit this export icon, right? I hit here. I want to include the triggers or I don't. Same goes for conditional logic, which we'll talk about in a second. I can export this here. It'll create a JSON file of this form. Now, if I were to just open this thing up, it's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo code, not a whole lot to work with. However, I send this over to another ServiceTitan user. They hit this import button, choose a file, right? The debrief that I just exported is right here. I import it, and since I have a duplicate name here, it'll create a copy of it. Simple as that, right? I've now got my new form right here. Nice way to spread some knowledge around, right? With all the community, with the masterminds group, we might as well make this a more regular occurrence, yeah? Last thing is going to be conditional logic on forms. Now, this is probably the trickiest piece of forms generally, but I'm going to take my debrief HVAC, right? And I'm going to add conditional logic. I may not need my tech to have the whole form right up in front of them when they first open it. Maybe I only want to expose and require certain questions based on answers they provide me. So what I like to do here, back to my form just so you can see it, I go additional logic here, and whenever I first open this form up, what do I want my text to say, right? Do I want to necessarily show them absolutely everything on here? No, maybe not. Maybe I want to highlight absolutely none of these areas, right? And just give us a little bit. So we'll go with our basics, right? Why not? And then I'll say, is this call complete? Yes or no? Those be the only things that my technician sees out of the gate. So if I preview this, here is what my tech is going to see on that form, right? Now, whenever I add a rule here, I can say if my technician answers which of these questions a certain way. I want to go, is this call complete? Now, if my technician answers it, either you can have this if something is filled, for example, if you have like a text-based thing, if they fill anything out, start requiring the rule that we set or are about to set. For this, where we have like a checkbox, we've got a couple different options here. Is equal to, yes, or no, we'll need to follow up. Let's say if my tech answers yes, this call is complete. When this if condition is met, if I did have multiple questions that would lead to the next thing, I could say, hey, if they answer yes to any of these things, ask them this. Or if they answer yes to all of these things, ask them this. It's pretty nice. So we'll do here, if the call is complete and my tech says yes, then I want to show what fields. I'm now going to say, did you perform a complete inspection? All right. At this point, let's preview one more time, right? As I'm looking at this, is the call complete? Yes. Did you perform a complete inspection? Yes or no? As I keep adding these rules, right, let's add another set of rules. Now, if my tech says perform a complete inspection is equal to yes, then I'm going to start showing pictures and notes, what parts need to be ordered, did you offer a club membership, did we add the materials off the truck so it'll be replenished, did you collect your payment, is the system operational, right? Now, whenever I preview here, as you can imagine, yep, was it complete? Yep, pictures and notes. And now we have to answer all these things. Wouldn't have even shown up here, however, if I say, no, we need to follow up. This never comes up, right? I don't even have to worry about all these fields. So this gives you an idea as you're building these things out, just how deep it can go. It is an incredibly valuable tool when especially if you have forms that are very long, or you have, hey, if you answered yes to this, please write da 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 da. And otherwise your techs are sitting there writing NA, NA, NA. This will cut down on so much time spent in the field for your technicians. I would recommend going into the Blue Collar Nerds YouTube page. Check out what he's got on conditional logic. If nothing else, go on here and click the Learn More. Give it a peek in the knowledge base. It'll give you a pretty good understanding of exactly how these things work. If you are curious on, whenever I'm previewing, it's not quite lining up. I will say it's somewhat like a puzzle. I know it looks very intense. Once you get the basic flow of making one or two rules, these things will become very natural to you. Now, yes, there is a bit of elbow grease up front to building this out. The time you spend doing this will save your technicians in the field hours over the course of a year. I mean, you will save hours of time. Cannot recommend it enough. So again, conditional logic, we go here, build all this up, right? I will say save draft, save draft, save draft. Similar to custom reporting, if I'm building and building and building here and I'm not saving anything, let's say I accidentally go back out of this page, I lose everything. So make sure you're saving as you go. Save and publish here, right? Publish this rule. Not necessarily going to publish my form, but I will at least set this rule onto that form. So that is, in a nutshell, the conditional logic. I know that was a wee bit of a brief overview, but who's kidding who? This video is long enough as it is. So I appreciate you all hanging with me. If you have any questions or would like a hand building out forms on your own account, please give me a buzz here at the Graphite Lab. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a holler if you need anything. And yeah, look forward to catching up with you soon.